It was just another busy day at St. Helena's Hospital, a place where the sounds of beeping monitors and hushed conversations filled the air. The sterile white walls seemed to absorb the chaos. But for Nurse Jasmine Carter, the day had started with an unsettling feeling that only seemed to grow with each passing hour. Jasmine was a seasoned nurse with 10 years of experience. Her dark skin, neatly tied back hair, and confident stride gave her a professional air that most people respected. However, today, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, like there was something in the air that made her uncomfortable. As she entered the pediatric ward to begin her rounds, the first thing she noticed was the family in room 204. A couple sat by the bed of their young son, who was recovering from a routine surgery. Jasmine approached the room with a warm smile, but the moment she entered, the smiles from the parents vanished. The father glanced at her, then at the floor as if avoiding eye contact. The mother's expression shifted to one of mild distaste, a subtle but unmistakable sign that Jasmine wasn't welcomed. "Good morning. I'm Nurse Carter. I'll be your son's nurse today," Jasmine said, trying her best to keep her tone friendly and professional. The mother didn't reply right away. She eyed Jasmine from head to toe, and then, with a dismissive gesture, muttered, "Isn't there someone else? We'd prefer a more experienced nurse." Jasmine held her ground, refusing to show how the remark stung. She smiled politely, though her heart raced slightly at the unspoken judgment she was receiving. "I assure you I have plenty of experience," she said calmly, setting up the necessary equipment. As she prepared to check the young boy's vitals, the father muttered just loud enough for her to hear, "What does she know about caring for kids? She's probably not even capable of handling real emergencies." Jasmine's hands faltered for a brief second, but she regained her composure quickly. She knew she had a job to do, and no amount of ridicule would deter her from doing it. She focused on the task at hand, taking the boy's temperature and checking his IV. But even as she worked, the whispers continued. "I swear, I don't know why they hire people like that," the mother said under her breath. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She wasn't going to let their disdain get to her. She had a duty to her patients, and that was all that mattered. Still, the weight of their words lingered in the air, threatening to make the already tense environment even more uncomfortable. Little did they know, Jasmine was about to prove that their assumptions were wrong in the most life-altering way possible. Just as the morning seemed to settle into a predictable rhythm, the quiet tension in room 204 shifted. The boy, who had been lying quietly in his hospital bed, suddenly jerked awake. His small body stiffened, and his eyes widened in fear as he began to gasp for breath. His chest heaved erratically, his lips turning blue as the oxygen seemed to vanish from his body. Jasmine, who was just finishing up with another patient nearby, immediately heard the faint sounds of distress. She turned to see the boy struggling in his bed, his parents frozen in horror. Without a moment's hesitation, she rushed to his side, her training kicking in. "Call for help!" she shouted, already assessing the child's condition as she placed her hand on his chest, feeling the erratic beats of his heart. He was going into cardiac arrest. The parents stood at the foot of the bed, too shocked to react. The mother's face was pale, her hand covering her mouth as she watched in panic. The father's eyes were wide with disbelief, but neither of them moved to assist. They simply stared at their son, helpless. Jasmine's mind raced, but her body moved with the fluid precision of someone who had been in life-and-death situations before. She had been through countless emergency situations in her career, but this one felt different. It was personal. The whispers, the judgment, the subtle insults, none of that mattered now. There was only the child, and she had to act. Her voice was calm and firm as she ordered the nearby nurse to fetch a crash cart. "Get the defibrillator. And I need oxygen. Now," she commanded, her hands already positioning the boy's body to begin CPR. The mother finally snapped out of her stupor and rushed forward, her hands trembling. "What do we do? Is he going to be okay?" she asked, her voice cracking. Jasmine didn't look up. "Just trust me. I'm doing everything I can," she said, her voice steady. Even though her heart raced, she could hear the distant beeping of the monitors, which had now turned into a chaotic rhythm, a sign that the boy's life hung in the balance. Her fingers pressed harder against his chest, and she began compressions with precise force, knowing the critical minutes were ticking by. "Come on, little guy, stay with me," she whispered to him under her breath. As she worked, the hospital staff swarmed into the room, but Jasmine remained the focal point, Her calm demeanor, her actions, and her sheer determination were the only things standing between the child and a tragedy. The seconds felt like hours. Then, just as the boy's heart began to slow, a miraculous thing happened. His pulse returned. It was faint, but it was there. He was alive. The crash cart was quickly wheeled out of the room, and the medical team continued to monitor the boy closely. Jasmine remained by his side, her eyes never leaving his fragile form as the machines beeped softly in the background. The once panicked atmosphere in the room began to calm, and though the child was still in critical condition, the immediate danger had passed. The parents, who had been standing in stunned silence, now moved closer to their son's bedside. The father reached out, his hand trembling as he brushed the boy's damp forehead. His eyes, which had been wide with disbelief moments ago, were now filled with a mixture of guilt and gratitude. The mother, who had previously been too shocked to speak, found her voice again, though it was filled with uncertainty. "Is he going to be okay?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The question was directed at Jasmine, whose steady hands and quick thinking had just saved their son's life. Jasmine took a deep breath, her own nerves starting to settle as she spoke. "He's stable for now. We'll need to keep monitoring him, but I'm confident he's going to make it. I'll be right here if you need anything," she said, her tone calm but reassuring. The couple stood there for a moment, unsure of what to say. The mother, still shaken, glanced at Jasmine with an expression that was a mixture of awe and regret. The father, on the other hand, stood with his mouth slightly agape, as if struggling to find the right words. It was clear they were processing the events, their earlier judgment of Jasmine's abilities now starkly in contrast to the reality of her professionalism. Then, as if sensing the weight of the moment, the father cleared his throat. He hesitated for a second, his eyes flickering toward Jasmine. I don't know what to say. Thank you. You saved our son." The words came out in a strained, almost apologetic tone. Jasmine nodded, offering a small smile as she stepped back to give them some space. "You don't need to thank me. I'm just doing my job," she replied. But even as she spoke, Jasmine could feel the subtle shift in the room. The energy had changed. No longer were there whispers of mockery or disdain. The same parents who had questioned her competence moments before now seemed genuinely humbled. The silence between them spoke volumes. As the boy's vitals stabilized, Jasmine turned to leave the room, making sure to check on the next patient in her care. But before she exited, she paused, casting one last glance at the parents, who now stood quietly by their son's bedside. Their faces, once filled with judgment, now wore expressions of deep gratitude and respect. The rest of the day passed in a blur for Jasmine. After the crisis in room 204, she continued her rounds. But her mind kept drifting back to that pivotal moment. The moment when the boy's heart stopped and she was the one who brought him back. It wasn't just the medical success that occupied her thoughts, though. It was the way the parents had changed. Their disdain had melted away in an instant, replaced by gratitude. But more than that, there was a subtle respect now hanging in the air, unspoken, but undeniable. As Jasmine walked through the hospital's quiet hallways, her mind replayed the words the father had said. "You saved our son." Those words were simple, yet they carried a weight that she hadn't realized she needed to hear. She entered the break room for a brief moment of respite, sitting down with a cup of coffee. Her hands still trembled slightly from the adrenaline of the emergency, but she allowed herself a moment to breathe. As she sat there, her mind wandered back to the earlier encounter in room 204. The whispers, the judgment, and the way she had been treated just because of her appearance. It wasn't the first time Jasmine had encountered racism in her career. She had learned to cope with it, to push through the discomfort, and to focus on her work. But it didn't make it any easier. Every offhand comment, every side-eye, every assumption about her competence based solely on her skin color, it all took its toll, no matter how strong she appeared on the outside. But today had been different. Today she had been tested in a way she never expected, and she had proven herself not just to the parents of the child she saved, but to herself as well. The doubts that had lingered in her mind for so long seemed to dissipate with each breath she took. As Jasmine finished her coffee and stood up to resume her rounds, she received a message on her phone. It was from the hospital's head nurse, requesting her presence in the administration office. Jasmine's brow furrowed slightly, unsure of what the summons was about. She hadn't expected to be called in during her shift. Curious but not overly concerned, she made her way to the office. But as she walked through the door, The sight that greeted her was unexpected. There, sitting at the desk, was the hospital's director, Dr. Peterson, along with the head nurse and the parents from room 204. Jasmine stepped into the administration office, her heartbeat quickening. The room fell silent as soon as she entered, and she noticed that the parents from room 204 were sitting across from Dr. Peterson, their expressions a mix of solemnity and respect. They looked up as she walked in, and for a moment there was an awkward stillness in the air. Dr. Peterson stood up, his usual confident demeanor replaced with something more measured. "Nurse, thank you for coming on such short notice," he said, his voice calm but filled with an underlying sense of gravity. "Please have a seat." Jasmine glanced around, feeling the tension in the room. She nodded, taking a seat across from the parents, who seemed to be struggling to find the right words. The father's face was red, his lips pressed tightly together as if he were holding something back. The mother, on the other hand, appeared nervous but earnest, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Dr. Peterson gestured toward the parents. "These are the family of the young boy you treated today. They've come to speak with us about something important." The father cleared his throat and shifted in his seat. We just wanted to personally thank you," he said, his voice low and sincere. Jasmine couldn't help but notice the humility in his tone now, a far cry from the judgment they had shown earlier. "We didn't know who you were when you came in," the mother added, her voice trembling slightly. "We didn't understand and we were wrong. But after what you did for our son, we owe you everything." Jasmine's eyes widened, surprised by the unexpected turn of events. She had been prepared for an apology, but not for this level of gratitude. She had saved their son's life, but the weight of their words made the experience feel even more profound. The father continued, his voice cracking slightly. I've always been one to judge people by what I see. I didn't realize how wrong I was. You showed us today what real strength looks like. How it's not about what's on the outside, but what's on the inside. You saved our son's life, and for that, we can never thank you enough." Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. For the first time, she felt the burden of the day lift. The resentment, the whispers, the doubts, they seemed to vanish in the face of this genuine acknowledgement. "Thank you," the mother added quietly. "You've changed our entire perspective. We'll never forget this." Dr. Peterson, who had been watching the exchange with a thoughtful expression, smiled warmly at Jasmine. "We've received the parents' gratitude, and I think it's safe to say that we all owe you a great deal of respect today." Jasmine simply nodded, her heart swelling with an unexpected warmth. "I'm just glad I was in the right place at the right time," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "It's what we're here for." As the parents stood to leave, they shook Jasmine's hand, their faces now soft with appreciation. "We'll make sure everyone knows the truth," the father said, his eyes meeting hers with newfound respect. "And we'll never judge again." The rest of the shift passed by in a haze for Jasmine. Though the work was constant, her thoughts kept drifting back to the conversation she had in the office. The apology, the respect, and the gratitude from the parents. Everything had shifted in an instant. It felt as though a heavy weight had been lifted off her shoulders, and for the first time in a long while she felt seen for the person she was, not just the nurse or the color of her skin. As she continued to care for her patients throughout the evening, Jasmine noticed subtle changes. Colleagues who had once been hesitant to interact with her now greeted her with warmer smiles. A few even approached her to ask for advice or assistance with patients. Jasmine could feel the change in the air. It was as if the entire ward had become a little more cohesive, a little more understanding. By the time her shift ended, Jasmine felt exhausted, but in a way that was different from usual. There was no lingering frustration, no anger simmering beneath the surface, just a quiet sense of fulfillment. Her phone buzzed with a message from the head nurse, letting her know that the parents had left a glowing review for her on the hospital's feedback system. But that wasn't the only surprise. As Jasmine scrolled through the message, she saw that the parents had taken it a step further. They had written a letter to the hospital board, praising Jasmine's quick thinking, her professionalism, and most importantly, her ability to rise above the racism they had initially displayed. They had shared the entire experience, detailing their transformation from skepticism to admiration. As Jasmine sat in the hospital's staff lounge, reading through the letter, she felt a deep sense of accomplishment. The family had turned their lives around that day, and Jasmine had played an integral part in it. She had not only saved their child, but had also shown them the true meaning of empathy, respect, and what it meant to be a professional, in a world that often judged based on surface-level assumptions. That night, as she finally made her way home, Jasmine felt something stirring within her, a desire to do more, to challenge the biases that so often shaped interactions in the hospital and beyond. She knew the journey wasn't over, but today had been a victory not just for her, but for every nurse, doctor, and staff member who had ever faced prejudice. The ripple effect was just beginning. The next morning, Jasmine arrived at the hospital early, her heart light but her mind focused. She had spent the night thinking about the changes she'd seen in her workplace, how the parents' transformation had been mirrored in the behavior of her colleagues. There was a shift in the air, a shift that Jasmine could feel deep within her. Today, it felt like the start of something new, not just for her, but for the entire hospital. As she walked through the front doors, she was greeted by familiar faces, some nurses, some doctors, and even a few patients' families. There was an unspoken sense of unity in the air, as though everyone had recognized the same truth, that respect, kindness, and professionalism were the only qualities that mattered, not the external things that often led to judgment. When Jasmine entered the break room, she was met with a surprise. The head nurse, Carla, stood at the counter with a warm smile, holding a folder in her hands. "Good morning, Jasmine," she greeted, her tone more relaxed than usual. "I have something for you." Jasmine raised an eyebrow, curious, but not entirely sure what to expect. Carla handed her the folder, and inside Jasmine found a formal letter from the hospital board. The letter was a recognition of her actions the day before and the profound impact they had on the atmosphere in the hospital. Not only had she saved a child's life, but her ability to handle the situation with such grace had set a new standard for how staff should treat one another and how patients should be treated, regardless of their background. Jasmine felt a mix of pride and humility as she read through the letter. But there was more. The board had decided to implement new training sessions across the hospital, focused on diversity, inclusion, and cultural competency. It was a small but powerful step toward creating a more inclusive and respectful environment for both staff and patients. Carla leaned against the counter, watching Jasmine as she processed the letter. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "I've been here for years, and I've never seen anything like what you did yesterday. The way you handled it, the way you saved that boy, it's inspiring." Jasmine looked up, meeting Carla's eyes. "I just did my job," she said softly, but there was a quiet pride in her voice. "I just want to make a difference." "You've already started," Carla said with a smile. "And you're not alone. We're all in this together." For the first time in a long while, Jasmine felt like she truly belonged. Weeks passed, and Jasmine found herself continuing to make a difference in her workplace. Though the attention surrounding her had quieted, the hospital board's diversity initiative had been rolled out across the facility, with new workshops and discussions taking place every week. It was clear that the message of inclusion and respect was becoming ingrained in the hospital's culture, and Jasmine felt a quiet sense of pride every time she saw a colleague or patient treated with genuine respect. The parents of the young boy she had saved remained in touch, sending occasional messages to check in on her and update her on their son's progress. Their words were always filled with gratitude, but more than that, there was a sense of change in their letters, a shift in their outlook that Jasmine had unknowingly been a part of. They often spoke about how they were teaching their children to value kindness over appearances, to see people for who they truly were, not just for their skin color or clothing. One afternoon, Jasmine was called into Dr. Peterson's office. It was a routine check-in, but when she entered the room, she noticed the atmosphere was different, more serious. Dr. Peterson looked up from his desk, his expression thoughtful. "Jasmine," he began, setting the papers down, "I wanted to talk to you about something. You know how we've been working on improving the environment here, fostering a culture of respect and inclusion?" Jasmine nodded, a little apprehensive about where this conversation might go. "Well, I've been asked to nominate someone for a leadership position in the upcoming hospital-wide task force on diversity and inclusivity," he continued, meeting her gaze. "And I've recommended you." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. She had never considered such a role for herself. She was a nurse, after all, not an administrator or manager. But the idea of being able to make an even bigger impact to shape the hospital's policies on inclusion and respect stirred something inside her. "I know it's a big responsibility, Doctor," Peterson said, his tone reassuring, "but I believe you have the vision and the strength to lead this. You've already proven that." Jasmine felt a rush of emotions: pride, doubt, excitement, and fear, all blending together. But at that moment, she knew she couldn't turn away from this opportunity. Not after everything she had fought for, not after everything she had experienced. She had seen firsthand how small actions could lead to big changes, and she knew she could be part of something even bigger. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice steady but filled with gratitude. "I'll do my best." Dr. Peterson smiled, his face softening. "I have no doubt you will." As Jasmine left the office, her mind raced with possibilities. She had come a long way from the nervous, unsure nurse who had first walked into the hospital. Now, she was ready to take on a leadership role, to continue her fight for equality, and to ensure that the work she had started didn't end with her. Jasmine's journey wasn't over, it was only just beginning.